Is nobody talking? Is that why I can't hear anything?
You can hear now? Okay.
I can hear. I have to, for some reason, my computer and my headphones, nothing is giving me the sound on the computer. So I've dialed in. So I'm operating from two separate machines here. And when everybody's quiet, I couldn't tell whether even my dial-in phone wasn't working. Sergeant Timmy, were you aware that the state police had issued a press release?
Not until this morning when I got woken up by my lieutenant and major. Nope. I was totally blindsided, and I'm pretty. I can use some other words, but I'll say pissed, because there are words that were in my document. It was an internal document for my agency that the media used directly. That I do investigations for my career, for my life, and it smells of an internal somebody releasing it, which I have to deal with on my end, because I don't think that was. I guess I'm not trying to hide stuff from the media, but if they're going to do that, then they need to let me know so that I can let my people know, because you just threw egg on my face, dealing with other things. So I'll be dealing with it through my department this week.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm not happy.
It must have been a very slow news day, so I figure.
Yeah, they were looking for something. And I'm sure the University of Colorado incident didn't help.
Yeah.
What happened at the University of Colorado?
They had about 800 students at a huge party. They blocked the road. And then when the police got there to ask them to scatter and leave, they set off fireworks, flipped cars, and threw bricks at the cops. So, yeah, that probably didn't. That's not going to help these kids up here at UConn too much with their incident, because I know that the university, speaking to some people in the university today, they're not too happy either. That it went the way it went, but like I said, I'll get down to the crux of where that came from, and I'll be dealing with that.
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody.
Hello, Mayor.
How are you, Charlie?
Made it through the weekend.
Hey, Terry.
Yes, good evening.
Hello, Terry.
I am getting my hair cut on Saturday. I can't wait. I'm tired looking like a shaggy dog. All right. It's 7 o'clock. Are we recording yet? There we go. Good evening, everybody. It is Monday, March 8th, 2021, and I'm calling the regular meeting of the Mansfield Town Council to order. Ms. Chang, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Osberger.
Here.
Mr. Osberg is here.
Berthelot.
Here.
Bruder.
Here.
Here.
Frattoni.
Mr. Bertoni is asked to be excused for tonight and perhaps for the next couple of meetings.
Freudman,
Here.
Kotchenberger,
Here.
Moran,
Here.
Shuren,
Here.
Shaken.
I'm sure he will be joining us momentarily. He was here for the Finance Committee meeting. Mr. Freudman.
Yes, I think I could do this now. If not, I'll do it later. I'd like to propose a change in our agenda order. On the consent agenda item 7B, I'd like to move that out of the consent agenda, and I suggest moving it to new business as item 9D.
Is there a second to Mr. Freudman's motion?
Point of order.
Mr. Freudman?
Under council rules of procedure, rule 3B, you don't need a second or
right.
justification.
So it's not a motion. That's right. It's not a motion. It's a request. Okay. Then that your request has been granted. All right. There have also been some suggestions about adjusting the order of presentation since there will be guests arriving or here for certain specific items, but frankly, I can't figure out a way to organize it so that our guests, that no guests would be inconvenienced. So I'm just going to hope that we proceed as efficiently as possible. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing regarding a proposed ordinance. Ms. Chang, would you please read the call for this public hearing?
Yes, Mayor, would you like me to read only the main portion of the call, or would you like me to read the entirety of it?
Read the call that has to do with the ordinance. I think how people sign in, that's a little bit too late. So just read us the subject matter.
Thank you. The Mansfield Town Council will meet virtually via GoToMeeting and hold a virtual public hearing at 7 p.m. on March 8th, 2021 to solicit public comment regarding an ordinance prohibiting firearms and other dangerous weapons in town buildings or on town-owned real property. Information regarding the proposed ordinance is on file at the town clerk's office for South Eagleville Road, Mansfield, and is posted on the town's website, mansfieldct.gov. Dated at Mansfield, Connecticut, this 23rd day of February, 2021. Thank you.
Mr. Aylesworth, do we have commentary on this proposed ordinance?
We do. A number of comments were submitted in writing, and I can read them into the record in roughly the order they were received.
That would be fine. Please do so.
Okay. This is the transcript that Tasha generated from a voice message left by Mr. Eric Polinko. I'm going to not read it in its entirety because some of it is sort of unrelated to the matter at hand. The reason I'm calling is I've been advised to leave a message about this ordinance that the council will be voting on. This is the gun ordinance. The reason why I'm calling, I feel the ordinance is a useless ordinance. Time and time again, the town council has had these ordinances come before them, and they've gone nowhere. They're not enforceable. And on top of that, this type of ordinance, you're infringing on other people's rights as far as gun owners are concerned. If somebody is a gun owner that has a permit to carry, as far as handguns and other things go, the council should leave them alone. It's their right, their privilege, they've paid for it, and if they're a law-abiding citizen, there should be no problem. And then he leaves his contact information if we want to talk to him further. I know Tasha did reach out to Mr. Holinko today to invite him to speak tonight, and he politely declined that offer. And so that is what we will read into the record on Mr. Holinko's behalf. Next is an email from Julia Sherman. Greetings, council members. I support an ordinance that bans people from bringing firearms to the town hall or to any place on town property. Bringing firearms is a statement of aggression and is a form of intimidation. You could result in great harm to our citizens. Thank you for making our town meetings a safe environment for all. Sincerely, Julia Sherman, Woods Lane, Mansfield Center. This is from, I believe, Martin and Karen Sommer. We are in support of the proposed ordinance prohibiting firearms and other dangerous weapons in town buildings or in town-owned real property. Recent events of violence, threats of violence at various federal, state, and local government properties indicate a need for regulations to restrict dangerous weapons on such properties in order to protect the safety of government officials and members of the general public. It is within the rights and responsibilities of the town of Mansfield to take this action in order to promote public safety. Therefore, we ask the town council to pass and adopt this ordinance. From Paul Stern of Mansfield Center to Mayor Antonio Moran and members of the council. I write in support of the proposed ordinance banning firearms and other dangerous weapons on town property and in town buildings. I realize this measure was inspired by information from the FBI about a potential demonstration on town property where it was feared there would be armed members of an extremist group. The event was apparently believed to be something similar to the January 6th rally in Washington, D.C. that resulted in a criminal assault on the U.S. Capitol, members of Congress, and the Vice President. The fears of the threat here have been overblown, but given the current political climate, concerns about the potential for armed protests in the future are not unreasonable, especially since Connecticut's gun laws allow for handgun permit holders to openly carry their weapons nearly everywhere. I must ask, a citizen's Second Amendment rights notwithstanding, of what use would a firearm or other dangerous weapon be in Town Hall, the Council Chamber, or Lions Memorial Park? On the other hand, what could possibly go wrong at an emotional public protest where many of the participants were armed? No one, including law-abiding and responsible gun owners, may bring a firearm into the state capitol or a public school, and for good reason. Likewise, Mansfield's public buildings and property, including its many hiking trails and public parks, must be places where residents can visit or do business with reasonable certainty that they will not encounter anyone with a lethal weapon at his or her immediate disposal. Thanks very much for adopting this common sense measure of added public safety. From Helen Marcy. Dear council members, I am writing for two reasons. First, I am writing to express support for the Martin Luther King mural project. Second, I'm writing in support of the proposed ordinance prohibiting firearms and other dangerous weapons in town buildings. Given recent events at the U.S. Capitol and the subsequent threats to government buildings and offices throughout the United States, I believe that adding another layer of safety for our town officials and staff is a wise move. Thank you for all that you do for our town. From Kathy Ward. Mr. Aylesworth, I am in support of the proposed ordinance prohibiting firearms and other dangerous weapons in town buildings and on town-owned property. I believe that we must do everything in our power to prevent the tragedies our nation faces on a daily basis due to the pandemic of gun violence. It is very disheartening knowing that gun deaths in our country are a predictable outcome of our country's lack of political will to make change and underinvestment in approaches to violence that can work. No, Mansfield is not a violence-prone community. We are blessed to live in a very safe place. However, the potential for any violent event must be addressed. I applaud the town council for demonstrating the political will to confront this issue. Any small steps we can take to make our communities more peaceful are steps towards a more peaceful nation. Thank you. From Chris Manakaby, might not be pronouncing that right. I'm in support of the proposed ordinance prohibiting firearms and other dangerous weapons in town buildings and on town-owned property. With the rise in gun ownership and gun-related incidents, this is a major concern for me as a resident of Mansfield. Tragic accidents happen when guns are used by untrained people. The increase in gun ownership will cause more tragedies, I'm afraid, not solve problems. We do not need more places to discharge firearms, and certainly not on town property. I look forward to your leadership in prohibiting the use of firearms and other dangerous weapons in town building or in town property. Thank you. From Haley Gervino. My name is Haley Gervino, and I am a Mansfield resident. I am writing in support of the ban on firearms on public property, parentheses town hall. It is extremely dangerous to have weapons on public property. In a study done by Pew Research, they found that the impact of more guns in a community would have a direct correlation to increased crime rates. They wrote, quote, policies that expand the number of gun owners or people carrying guns could deter violent crime if would-be attackers fear confrontations with armed victims. The concept of increasing the number, end quote. The concept of increasing the number of guns in Mansfield should be squashed. I am writing in support, and I hope that the town makes the correct decision for all residents. And finally, from Elena Gervino, I am writing in support of the proposal to ban all firearms from town buildings. There is nothing a gun can do to resolve disputes that can't be resolved with open and transparent dialogue. Second, firearms bring inherent risk to anyone in the vicinity of the weapon, including the carriers of those weapons. Hasn't there been enough tragedy, violence, and death in our lifetimes caused by people using guns? Finally, the more money the town spends on security, protecting people in town buildings against gun violence, the less money we have to spend on students and other townspeople. Those are all the comments, I believe, that were submitted in writing.
And nobody has asked to speak to us during this meeting.
I don't believe so. I believe we have up to 2 people on the line looking to address the council during public comment on a different topic.
Okay, well, I would like to thank all of those people who commented on the gun ordinance, thoughtful comments, and they are appreciated. The next is the opportunity for the public to address the council on any issue. And Mr. Aylesworth, I believe you have people. These comments are limited to 3 minutes. They can be on any issue. Please be civil.
Mayor, point of order.
I'm sorry, 5 minutes, limited to 5 minutes.
5.
And
Mayor, I have
my legislative 3-minute limit kicked in. I don't know where that really came from. Mr. Kotchenberger?
I just think we need to close I don't think we closed the other meeting. Public meeting here.
The hearing on the gun ordinance is now closed. Okay, so we will proceed to our regular opportunity for the public. Mr. Aylesworth, who have we got?
I believe we have John Bayers. John, you on the phone? If John is not here,
I believe I may be caller 1, so I don't know if there's anybody else on the phone.
okay. Yeah, and then there's going to be a Jack Bennett. So I don't know if Jack or John are on. Does not look like it. Okay.
Well, if those people who requested an opportunity to speak wish to put their comments in an email or on paper, we will be happy to receive them following this meeting.
I do have, Mayor, I do have 2 public comments submitted in writing, unrelated to the gun ordinance.
Okay. Please read them.
Okay. This relates to the swap shop at the transfer station reopening. Dear Mr. Aylesworth, I would like to add my, quote, yes vote for reopening the swap shop at the Mansfield transfer station. This facility provides our town with a tremendous resource for recycling used but unneeded items. Records are available as to the amount of swap shop recycling that has not had to go into the mainstream garbage. This recycling has saved the town thousands of dollars. The swap shop is manned by a wonderful, helpful set of volunteers. It costs the town nothing or very little to continue this service. And yes, it is a service. Please reopen the swap shop. I have used it as a drop-off point and a, quote, found it source for many years of its existence. If you'd like any further information from me, feel free to call, provides a number. I'd be happy to provide further comment. That's from Harriet Walker of Riverview Road. And then correspondence from Irene Burke. As a 48-year resident and taxpayer of Mansfield, I am deeply distressed over the recent behavior of UConn students and off-campus partying. Why can this be allowed? And if those involved could be dispersed into our community to put us at risk of this pandemic. They should have suffered more than the proverbial slap on the wrist.
Well, thank you to our public commenters. And again, if anybody wishes to reach us, we read our email, and Mr. Aylesworth also, if there's email directed to him alone, will read it to us. The next item on our agenda is the report of the town manager, Mr. Aylesworth.
Thank you, Mayor. Second round interviews with finalists for the permanent fire chief position took place this last week. I want to thank everybody who participated in the panels. We had a panel with myself, Sergeant Timmy, Chief Perez, Yukon's fire chief, and Holly Schaefer, Human Resources Director. And then our department heads took place on another panel. So we had 2 finalists, and the finalists swapped between the 2 groups. I'm happy to report that as of today, a conditional offer has been made to one of the finalists, and I hope that that proceeds to its logical conclusion, but not in a position to disclose anything more at this time. Other than to say that we are hoping that the permanent chief is in place in the middle or latter portion of April is our target timeline. Development of the FY22 budget continues. We're on track for you all to hear my recommendations at the end of this month. This is very much a marathon, not a sprint. And it's been made a bit more challenging with our finance department being short-staffed, but they're soldiering through, and we're getting there, and we're getting closer and closer to a bottom line that I'm reasonably comfortable with, and hopefully the council will be reasonably comfortable with as well. As you can appreciate, with this being another COVID-influenced year, as well as the challenges facing the community center in particular, certain budgets really warrant a harder look this year than in a typical year, even if we are always giving it a hard look. I've been fortunate to take place in a few, I guess what you call media appearances. I was invited to contribute to a Facebook Live event hosted by the Taste of Mansfield. There was a link to that video in your packet. It profiled 4 farms that offer CSA shares on a subscription basis, and it was timed to coincide with the CSA sign-up week nationwide, which was at the end of February. Mr. Wayne Norman hosted me on his program, WILIAM, this past Friday, and it was a great introduction both to Wayne and a great platform for me to introduce myself as the new town manager to members of the community. Mr. Norman's asked if I'd be interested in being a regular guest on his program. We're tentatively talking about the first Friday of the month. I don't know if that'll be the specific date or not, but I certainly appreciate his offer, and it was very enjoyable talking with him. And I appreciate him giving me somewhat of a pass for my baseball loyalties. This past weekend, as many of you know, the Senate passed the American Rescue Plan, which includes aids to towns and cities as part of a broader economic relief package. The aid to towns had been reduced by $5 billion in the Senate bill, but it was with the lobbying of the National League of Cities and state leagues, including the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, that funding was restored, and the bill is headed back to the House, where it's expected to pass with the current amendments, and then signed into law by the president in the coming days. I would strongly encourage council members who are interested, and I myself will be taking part in this as well, because there's a lot of information to digest. But there's a federal issues policy briefing. Hopefully you all received the RSVP for that, so you can get on your calendars if you're interested in taking part, and that's tomorrow morning from 9:30 to 10:30. Both members of our U.S. Senate delegation are also holding listening sessions and information sessions later this week, and there's information included on that as well in a separate email I sent you. But if you can only attend one of the 3 gatherings, I would strongly urge you to take part in the federal issue policy briefing tomorrow, which is going to feature representatives from the state of Connecticut's Washington office, as well as the National League of Cities Senior Executive and Director for federal advocacy. So a lot of useful information should come out of that. After multiple meetings with pertinent design and engineering professionals, members of the school building committee, and town officials and department heads, I'm happy to report that the town has officially issued the invitation to bid for the construction of the new elementary school. The bid invitation was officially issued on March 2nd. General contractors are going to be asked to participate in a pre-bid meeting on March 16th, and bids have a deadline of submission of April 12th. And all bids will be received online, and more information on that bidding opportunity is available on the town's website. Let's see. As far as emergency childcare assistance, planning staff, our planning staff met with the Department of Housing this afternoon to discuss modification to the program eligibility. This is the Helping Hand program that we're administering with Small Cities Grant Funds that would allow the town to help families currently receiving assistance from the Care for Kids program. This modification would close the gap between a family's current share of monthly child care costs and the 7% of monthly income that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has identified as affordable child care. The request for the modification was generated by feedback from local child care providers regarding the needs of Care for Kids families. Department of Health program staff provided verbal approval of the change, and our staff is in the process of following up with formal documentation. Program guidelines and application forms will be revised as needed in the coming days to include the modification to child care program eligibility, as well as providing guidance for the food assistance program, which is expected to roll out in April. We've sent out postcards advertising both the food and child care assistance programs, and those should start arriving in residents' mailboxes later this week. From the Downtown Partnership, the Mansfield Public Schools Grade 4 Remote Learners fundraiser to support local businesses and essential workers is still open. They are raising money to purchase gift cards from local businesses and then donate the gift cards to essential workers at Wyndham Hospital. They have raised over $3,300 already, and there's a GoFundMe page set up to collect those donations. The partnership is co-sponsoring a special event with the Ballard Institute and Museum of Puppetry and the Yukon Puppet Arts Program, ISH, an MFA performance by Yukon Puppet Arts graduate student Felicia Cooper. This 45-minute family-friendly puppet show will be performed outdoors on March 18th, 19th, and 20th at 7 p.m. on Betsy Patterson Square in downtown Storrs. These outdoor shows will be socially distanced and follow state of Connecticut COVID-19 safety protocols. Admission is free, but due to COVID-19 safety precautions, seating reservations must be made in advance by visiting bimp.ticketleap.com. The performance will be streamed on March 21st at 7 p.m. on the Ballard Institute's Facebook Live page in celebration of World Puppetry Day. Human Services, Mansfield Farms to Family Program, have a brief update on that front. All 15 slots for low-income households to receive CSA shares have been allocated. We currently have 8 more families that are also interested. The program will also distribute 100 food boxes 4 times over the growing season to low-income families through the grant. And the Senior Center will be holding a drive-through St. Patrick's Day event this Friday. I look forward to attending myself and helping out. A traditional corned beef and cabbage meal will be offered, and seniors will decorate their cars to celebrate the occasion. And because of the drive-through format, obviously being done in a COVID-safe way. From our library, in light of the governor's recent declaration that capacity limits have been lifted on a wide range of facility types, including libraries, the public library is basically actively deliberating its own reopening plans and other changes to operations. Positivity rates still are relatively high, but we are moving closer to reopening, and the library is doing that in consultation with both myself and public health officials. On behalf of our town clerk, the state's Government Administration and Elections Committee held a public hearing on February 22nd, in part to solicit public comment on proposals to implement no excuse absentee voting and early in-person voting. These are House Bills 58 and 59. Both Senator Flexer and Representative Haddad serve on the committee, and the Mansfield town clerk had contacted them to share the Connecticut Town Clerks Association strong recommendation that a legislative task force be created this legislative session to examine the changes to statute, procedures, fundraising, and technology upgrades necessary to implement those changes. The work to implement the changes is critically important and difficult. The intensive review of the election process must begin now in order to allow town clerks and registrars to proactively plan and ensure election integrity. I was actually going to, if he's still on and available, when I'm done with Public Works, I'm going to invite Sergeant Timmy to provide just a brief overview on the party this weekend, which I know is of interest to the council. I will simply say at this point that it was disappointing to learn of this event through news media. Sergeant Timmy and I talked about this today, and I know he shared in that surprise as well that we learned through those means. But certainly in the interest of effective collaboration, it's really important for both the town and the University of Connecticut officials to receive timely notification and updates on that front so that we can plan and distribute internal information on these sorts of events concurrently. For Public Works, this snow season, the department has responded to 9 storms, 21 treating events, and hauling snow away 7 times, including 2 hauls using a contractor. To date, there have been over 2,500 hours of overtime, costing approximately $100,000, and we've purchased just under 1,500 tons of treated salt for approximately $122,000. The budget for the snow season is $125,000 for overtime and $225,000 for treated salt and $20,000 for a hauling contractor. Based on current expenditures, we've had below average snow plowing season thus far. And with that, Sergeant Timmy, if you would like to share a few words on this Saturday's events.
Sure. Welcome. So Saturday, about 11:30 p.m., Troop C Barracks received a very large, loud party over, 160 Birch Road in town. Upon our arrival, it was very clear and evident that there was a very, very large party. What I mean by that is it was the loud noises was almost like the humming of a beehive. It's the ton of voices that echo out of the house onto the street in front, to where there's a bunch of numerous student-age kids outside the house, and then when they open up the door, it got obviously significantly louder. So we made contact with who identified themselves as the renters, and advised them of the governor's executive order, and they need to, vacate the premise with the party goers. So they did. If you didn't know, I'll let you know. It takes about an hour to get 150 plus people with Ubers outside of a house. So we were there almost an hour, close to an hour, waiting to safely move the students from that residence to wherever their next destination was. Situations like that, would be very proactive and not we do not encourage the students to walk. We don't want them walking around the back roads, which they're actually pretty good at that. They'll wait for the Uber. And the DN renters, the 3 renters were issued infraction tickets in violation of the governor's executive order. And that was the end of it, and we left that scene. And then I'll get into different information with Ryan on the other side this week as I learn more information on how the media got a hold of all that and how that got leaked.
Thank you, Keith. That concludes my report.
I also want to comment that I was contacted at 7:30 this morning with questions about a press release which the reporter read to me. And I have several thoughts about it. First of all, we have had a number of parties of this size, and we normally deal with them, or Sergeant Timmy and his staff normally deal with them the way they deal with them. They send people home. They give nuisance ordinances, which are tickets of $250, or if it's a violation of the governor's executive order, it's a $500 ticket. And there's almost never a second incident at that address. So I was very surprised to find that this had reached all the news, reached the Hartford Courant. That wasn't just the Chronicle inquiring, but it also showed up in the governor's press conference this afternoon. I think it must have been a very slow news day for this to have reached this kind of attention. On the other hand, I will say that when press releases are issued by somebody having to do with an event in my town, at least the town manager, if not the mayor, the resident state trooper, and the university should be notified before the press, or at least simultaneously with the press. So that was very disappointing. I was interviewed by the Courant later in the day. At 7:30 in the morning, I was interviewed by the Chronicle, and later in the day by the Courant, and I think Mr. Shakin also had an opportunity to speak with the Courant. So, as a rule, the students around here have been pretty responsible, but this kind of an event indicates that there are students who are willing to run risks with their own lives and certainly with ours, and it's very discouraging to see. Mr. Shakin, and then other questions or comments of the town manager. Mr. Shakin.
Yeah, I have two questions on the manager's report. The first one, although it seems like Sergeant Timmy's dropped off, but maybe Ryan can answer this question. In the fall, when the beginning of the semester, we were concerned during the warm weather month or two in the beginning of the semester of significant, party issues, which we always are, but then being sort of combined with COVID-19. And we were assigned as a result of that additional police from the state police to help with weekend patrols. And I'm curious if that ever stopped, and if it did, if we are again going to be assigned additional patrols from the Connecticut State Police as we enter the last month of UConn's semester. They leave for spring break and don't return on April 9th.
Well, it appears
Sergeant Timmy has just rejoined us. Sergeant Timmy, did you hear Mr. Shakin's question?
I'm sorry, I did not. I was having a problem with my audio.
That's okay.
You could just repeat that, sir?
Sure. In the fall, you'll recall that we were assigned additional troopers for sort of COVID party patrol, for governor's executive order patrol, whatever you want to call it. There was a concern of events just like this happening. Luckily, in the fall, it was a concern that really didn't come to fruition until much later in the semester. My question is, are we assigned similar personnel for the last month of the semester, given that the students are expected to go home on April 9th?
We are not as of yet. I had actually petitioned my department in December to request those patrols to continue through the next semester. I was advised by the colonel's office that it was put through to the legislators and that they were going to be voting on it. But as of yet, they have not voted on it, and I have not been given any indication whatsoever that those added patrols will be coming our way. I'll be having that discussion with my lieutenant in the next day or two to reach down to the colonel's office and up through my chain of command to find out if that's going to be happening and request additional help. And I did hear you say something about St. Patrick's Day, and I don't know what way it was spoken in, but that is also one of my concerns because routinely St. Patrick's Day is their spring break, so a lot of the students are gone, even the off-campus students are gone. However, this year is different because there is no spring break until April, so all the students are going to be here. So we're going to have everybody here for the
Thanks. That's helpful.
Irish festival.
You froze again, Sergeant. But I didn't mention St. Patrick's Day, but that is concerning. And Mayor, I think it might make sense for you and I to again do some outreach to try to ensure that those troopers, who I think were funded in the fall, partially at least by the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which has gone away but is coming back in the American Rescue Plan Act, federal dollars, to see if we can't make sure that we're adequately staffed for the next 4 weeks. My other question actually has to do with that federal funding. Ryan, it was in your report, and I just was wondering if you had a sense yet of how much federal money Mansfield, both town and school, is set to receive directly due to the American Rescue Plan Act. And I've seen some news about some of the cities in Connecticut having runs available for their funding. There's a story today about $94 million coming to the city of New Haven. I would expect our allocation would be substantially lower than that, but I'm curious if you know what we ought to expect.
There have been numbers that have been sent around. I guess, at the risk of putting something out there that seems to be a little fluid at this point, I would prefer to, if I could, follow up with the council and provide that maybe in an email breakout, just to make sure I capture it accurately.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions for Town Manager? Ms. Berthelot?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to say thank you to Sergeant Toomey for working so hard to keep the community safe, including the party goers. Not setting them out on the roads, either to drive or to walk, is so very important. And at the end of the day, we want everybody to be safe. So thank you for that. I have so to Mr. Aylesworth, again, thank you for an excellent report and all of the wonderful initiatives going on in town. I'm afraid I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record on this one little thing that I'm worried about. Tonight, my husband had to go to the pharmacy at the Big Y and overheard somebody who had become so frustrated. She was well into her 70s. We're trying to get an appointment for her first vaccination that she'd just given up. And fortunately, the pharmacist worked very closely with her and ultimately did give her the town's telephone number for support with this, which is terrific. Though I just want to once again reiterate the importance of doing all the outreach we can in as many places we can, including like the corned beef supper, every opportunity we can to make sure that folks who are having difficulty feel like they have a place to turn to. Thank you.
Thank you. We should have an opportunity to have more of this discussion when Mr. Miller gives his COVID report. Is there anybody else who has a question for Mr. Aylesworth? Mr. Aylesworth?
Yeah, I don't have a question for myself, but I guess I will say, at the risk of having to amend it in the email I send all you guys in the next day or so, I just confirmed what I was going to say out loud, but I want to be sure. It's approximately $5.7 million that the town of Mansfield, I believe, is if you look at the town list, that's the Mansfield specific portion, based on population and the formula that they're using. One thing to note is because Connecticut doesn't have county government, the monies that are held at the local level for county governments is basically planned to be dispensed out to municipalities. So there's basically not that additional layer of government in Connecticut. And so it's 4.7 or $4.8 million, I believe. But then when you add in our proportion of the Tallinn County piece, it raises that to about 5.7 million. So I'll do a little more research. That these numbers are like a week or so old. But I think ballpark, that's the universe we're talking about, Mr. Shakin.
Mr. Aylesworth, can some of that go to the community center for its losses? Is that the sort of thing that will be covered, or is this all for, well, what is it for?
Yeah, I mean, so ostensibly, there's going to be restrictions on this related to, impacts of COVID-19. The devil's in the details. We need to review the legislation and get more guidance. But I think I can feel comfortable saying that this should not be viewed as blanket aid for unrestricted sort of reasons. And so because the community center specifically has experienced some hardship related to COVID-19. That's certainly an area that we're going to investigate. I'm just not prepared at this time to offer any sort of analysis of whether or not I believe that will line up.
And I believe our congressional delegation is to be thanked for making sure that there's a mechanism in this bill for giving money to communities in states where there aren't county governments.
Right.
Sure.
I believe I was just going to say in the last the last federal legislation, I believe that there was economic, money. There were monies available for private gyms. Unfortunately, as a municipal, government, our community center wasn't able to take advantage of that. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not they've made some legislative fixes in that regard this time around.
Just a general principle usually has been one-shot money should go for one-shot activities. I imagine that would be a kind of general guiding principle for the regulations that we get. But anyway, I'll leave that for further discussion.
My thought was that some of this deficit that we're seeing at the community center is specifically because they were closed or mostly closed. Any other questions for Mr. Aylesworth? Mr. Shaken.
Can I just ask a clarifying question about that? Is that 5.7 million the cumulative total, or is that just the town's municipal local aid? I know school districts are also receiving substantial direct federal funding in order to cover COVID-related costs, but those costs seem pretty broadly defined. It's not just a facility cost or anything like that. And so I'm curious if that's a school and town or just town number.
I believe that's school and town, but I'm going to need to confirm that for you.
Thanks.
Any further questions? All right, thank you very much, Mr. Aylesworth. Now on to reports and comments of council members. I have nothing particular to comment on. Does anybody else have a report or comment? Hearing none, we'll move on. The next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes, or the consent agenda, which now contains only the approval of minutes. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Mr. Shuren? Mr. Shuren moves to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second? Seconded, Ms. Berthelot. Any further discussion? Are we ready to vote? Does anybody wish to abstain from the consent agenda? Does anybody wish to vote in the negative on the consent agenda? I declare that we have a unanimous approval of the consent agenda. Now, the old business is a discussion of the proposed firearms ordinance. Mr. Shaken, it's your committee. Would you please report?
Sure. Thanks, Mayor. The committee, which consisted of Mr. Osberger, and myself, met several weeks ago in between, before our last council meeting. So this report is short because it's duplicative of what I said at the last meeting. We discussed a draft that Mr. Deneen had prepared and talked with Mr. Deneen about things that are essentially summarized in the memo that's attached to your, it's in your packet today, although it wasn't prepared in writing for our committee meeting. We ended up drafting the ordinance that you see before you, and I will summarize it briefly, and then what I think makes sense is to ask Mr. Deneen.
Mr. Shaken, could you hold off a minute? Somebody needs to shut off their speaker. We're getting noises and echoes. Mr. Osberger, do you wish to speak? If Mr. Osberger wishes to speak.
Yes, I would like to submit that.
Do I have the floor, Mayor?
Mr. Osberger,
I have a question.
Please turn off your mic. As soon as Mr. Shaken finishes his report, I will call on you. But in the meantime, would you please turn off your mic because we're getting noises. Mr. Shaken, would
okay.
you continue?
No. So,
I'll call on you as soon as Mr. Shaken concludes. Mr. Shaken.
Okay, just very briefly to summarize what the ordinance does, and then, like I said, I think what we ought to do tonight is open things up for Mr. Deneen to provide a quick overview, and take questions from counselors. Just so folks on the council know, for a reason I'll talk about when in a second. I don't think it's a good idea for us to suspend our rules and move for passage this evening. I think we ought to wait for 2 weeks till our next meeting, which is what our rules say we should do. So anyway, the ordinance basically is very simple. It extends our existing prohibition on the possession of firearms and other dangerous weapons, which exists currently for the town's parks and trails, to all of the town-owned property, including municipal buildings. And so that includes the carrying of weapons in Town Hall and the Mansfield Community Center and the Public Works Garage, and it includes the carrying of those weapons outside of those buildings as well. Specifically excluded, though, are several things. First, the lawful possession of firearms on town streets and on town sidewalks is very much still permitted. If the town owns its streets, we are the owner of that piece of real property. And so if we were to just ban firearms on all of our property, we would be definitely in violation of the Constitution. So we are continuing to allow for the lawful possession of weapons on town's roads, highways, streets, and sidewalks. The other thing that's in the proposed ordinance is an exception for a firearm that is lawfully stored, locked in a vehicle in a parking lot. And then finally, there are several carve-outs for people who are allowed to carry firearms within town buildings. The first is a police officer who is acting within the scope of his or her duties or is otherwise authorized by law. And so obviously, Sergeant Timmy and the rest of the resident state troopers' offices in Town Hall, they are permitted to carry their firearms when they are in Town Hall, as is any other on-duty police officer in Connecticut or anyone else who's covered under Section 53A(3) of the general statutes. And then there's also a veteran as defined in Section 27103 who's performing in uniform as a member of an official ceremonial unit. So honor guards in our cemeteries, those kinds of things are permitted if they are possessing firearms and are defined in that part of state statute. From a violation perspective, there's a municipal fine of not more than $100, but then I'm going to ask Kevin to explain in a second a little bit about how state statute works with regard to state law regarding carrying of firearms. So that's my summary of what the committee passed. Mayor, if you want to take questions immediately, we can do that. But if you'd like Kevin to offer an explanation of the memo that he's prepared that's in your packet, we can do that first. It's up to you.
Would you first restate why you think we should not vote on this tonight?
Sure. Sorry, you're right. I said I would say that. Since the committee met, it's come to our attention that the Camp Mansfield offers archery to kids as one of the activities. And if you read the ordinance, one of the things that's referenced in state law as a dangerous weapon is archery equipment. And so we need to add an amendment to this ordinance to allow for that activity. And I'm not exactly sure what it will say. And so my preference would be, instead of amending this on the floor tonight, this is not a controversial, but nonetheless substantive amendment, that we included in next meeting's packet, have Kevin draft something that gets to that issue and include it in the next meeting packet so the public can have an updated copy of what we're going to pass or what we're going to consider passing in 2 weeks. That would be why I would recommend waiting until the next meeting instead of trying to do something on the floor, which might get a little messy.
Thank you. Mr. Osberger, you have the floor next. Mr. Osberger, go ahead. You're muted. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, it takes me a bit to get my microphone icon to come up. Ben, I just happened to notice that the ordinance that was presented in our packet this time around doesn't reflect that addition that we put in, and I see now that we are going to have to probably go back into our committee and add more, right? Am I correct?
Which element are you referring to? The archery element or something else?
Well, I had put a amendment on there that said, except where otherwise prohibited, the lawful possession of firearms, air guns, air rifles, or crossbows, longbows, or archery equipment within a locked vehicle shall be permitted. And it doesn't appear on this version that came in our packet this week.
Mr. Shakin, can you answer that question?
Yeah, through you, Mayor, that should be in our packet. It seems like an error on the part of staff that was not included, and it's what the committee passed. I'm very hopeful that the public hearing was noticed with the correct language for today, but I would like Mr. Aylesworth to confirm that before the day is over. But Mr. Osberger, the amendment that you made in committee that was presented to the council 2 weeks ago when we set the public hearing should have been in this packet, and it is not. I have also just noticed that.
Okay.
To your second point, it's up to the council if they wish to send the archery amendment back to committee. I think we can talk. My personal opinion is if the council thinks that all we need to change is that it doesn't need to go back to a committee, but that is up to the council as a whole.
I would recommend that whatever is on the agenda at our next meeting has been reviewed and approved by the committee and meets its full understanding of what it's recommended. Whether that can be done by the committee chair alone or whether it requires a meeting of a committee, I believe would be up to the committee to decide. But whatever appears on our agenda should be what it is that the committee wishes to recommend to the council. Mr. Osberger, followed by Mr. Freudman.
Perhaps we could ask Councilor Deneen if the language that I added in there would in fact also include archery equipment, since it's part of that clause.
I understand it would include it as a prohibition, but it wouldn't include excluding it as if it were offered by Parks and Rec as a program for kids.
Oh.
Mr. Shakin, followed by Mr. Deneen, followed by Mr. Freudman.
So the language that the committee added that Mr. Osberger is referring to would have allowed for the lawful possession of lawfully stored firearms or other dangerous weapons, which would include archery equipment, in a vehicle. That's not present in our packet, but it was present in the packet 2 weeks ago when we set the public hearing. The issue that has arisen since the committee meeting is that the Parks and Rec Department would like to still offer archery to children at Camp Mansfield, and therefore we need to add a piece of language to this, which is what I think needs to happen at our meeting in 2 weeks after the public has seen the addition. That would permit that activity in one way or another. So whether that requires a committee meeting or not is up to the council. I don't think my personal opinion is it's not a change that would warrant a second public hearing. It's not a change to the substance of the ordinance besides to clarify, an issue that's existing. But regardless, I think it would be helpful if Kevin went through some of the research that he did around the constitutionality of this ordinance and then answered any sort of legal questions folks have. Is it clear what the issue is around the archery equipment? I'm happy to answer to the best that I can, and maybe Ryan can help with what's going on in terms of that program in particular.
Let me restate what I said earlier, and that is whatever comes to the council at our next meeting should accurately reflect what the committee wishes the council to vote on. If this requires a meeting of the committee to achieve it, I would request that you do that. If it doesn't, if the committee does not believe it requires a meeting, then the chair of the committee can make the presentation. But I don't think we need the whole council to do it. I think this is a committee decision, not a council decision. Mr. Janine, you're up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, as we discussed at the ad hoc committee, what we're really talking about, while it does involve firearms, is primarily the issue of the ability to control the town's property. And I think it's fairly clear with regard to the ability to regulate that within the buildings and the surrounding buildings, both at the state and federal level, that the town does have a right to control its property, both under the General 7-148 provisions, which I cited in that memo. But if you look at everything from both the state and federal level, there's federal laws regulating the carrying of firearms in post offices, in federal buildings, state regulation with regard to both school buildings and buildings which the legislature is moving in. So it's really a control of your own physical properties. There is some concern, I think, with regard to as Councilman Shakin noted, carrying on roads and sidewalks. The federal Supreme Court took up an issue related to that with the New York cases, which were subsequently dismissed as moot. And I think, but it was a fairly strong indication to most observers that that was an issue that they were willing to address. But excuse me. But this as primarily as regulating the use of your own property, I don't see any constitutional, either under the state or federal, impediments to that. There's a plethora of municipalities that also, similar to Mansfield, regulate the carrying in their parks and other properties on that. So it's not so much a Second Amendment, although people can look at it that way, as it is the control of your own real property and protection of your own employees. So, but they have to have any specific questions that people might have. It's an area that you could write a treatise on in terms of the Second Amendment, and many treatises have been written on that. But I think this is a fairly narrow approach in terms of looking at the protection of your own property, that does not necessarily impact. So.
Okay, the next hand I saw was Mr. Freudman. Mr. Freudman, do you still wish to speak?
Yes, very briefly. I agree with everything that was said, so it pretty much covered what I had. Yes, I think we should not vote on this tonight. We really need to see a good language, as we had agreed a couple of weeks ago. Maybe it's better it goes back to the committee first to be absolutely sure, although I'm not, completely firm on that, whichever way the rest of the council thinks is best. But yeah, we need to have language in there, as we had agreed last time, that wouldn't put people in violation of the law for having things properly locked in their vehicle on town, say parked in the town parking lot or in the parking garage, as long as that's okay per the ordinance. It has the language in there. That's what we need to see. So yeah, that's all I had.
Mr. Osberger.
My question is for Attorney Deneen. What about hunting permitted on property that the town owns, like the Mansfield Hollow Dam?
Town doesn't own that. That's state property.
That state are part of the trails though, or no?
It's a state park.
Yeah, in the immediate area of the dam, yes, but I'm talking about on the outlying areas.
It's all state park. It's all state land.
It is.
There are state trails through it, but they're not town trails. They're state trails.
They are, okay.
Like the Nipmuc Trail crosses many towns. It actually crosses a couple of states too. But Mr. Shakin, followed by Ms. Berthelot.
If I could ask, just maybe ask Mr. Osberger's question a different way. For Ryan or Kevin, are you aware of any town land where hunting is currently permitted? Any town-owned parks or land?
I am not aware of any. My understanding is decidedly the opposite.
And then my second question is unrelated. This is my only sort of substantive question. And I know the answer because we talked about it in committee, but for the public, in the first sentence of this ordinance, Kevin, it says pursuant to the authority granted by Connecticut General Statute Section 29-28E. We had a public comment that said that this was an unenforceable ordinance, and I would tend to agree with it if all we had the power to do was issue a $100 fine. But could you explain what 29-28E says and what it would therefore give our law enforcement officers the authority to do if someone were in violation of this ordinance?
There was an amendment back, I think it was in the late 90s, that clarified that the issuance of a pistol permit or the permits listed therein does not give you the right to carry a firearm when the owner of the party in control of that property bans it or prohibits it. And separately from that, there's a separate criminal charge that someone can be arrested for if they violate that part of the provision. So it's really by prohibiting this, the carrying of firearms and dangerous weapons within the town buildings. Not only do we have the fine, but the state police, in our case, would have the ability to make arrests under that separate criminal statute.
Thanks.
Ms. Berthelot.
I just have two clarifying questions. This is a follow-up on Mr. Friedman's question. I just make sure I understood that the parking garage is going to be under this is viewed not as a building, but as a parking lot. Is that correct?
Correct. That was my understanding from, I'm sorry if you're asking me, Counsel.
I'm sorry, Attorney Deneen, I didn't hear that.
Sure. My understanding from the discussion at the ad hoc committee, it was intended that the parking garage be treated as a parking lot. If someone secured those, that would be permissible.
And there's at least one office there, right, in that building? So that would be, I might be wrong about that. It's my understanding that there's an office in the building that would be treated like town,
Correct.
like actual real property. Like
the center, which has the ticketing office, which has downtown partnership and a library extension, that whole area is town owned, and that would not be considered a parking area.
Okay. And my other clarifying question is to follow up on Councilor Shakin's clarification and Attorney Deneen's. In terms of arrest powers that the state troopers would have, does that fall from the, is that linked to the license, the permit to carry, or is that a separate ability to arrest? Is that someplace else?
That's separate. That's just existing in the state statutes today. But the party that owns or controls the real property has to prohibit that, the carrying of firearms there.
I guess my question is, if somebody were carrying a firearm and wasn't a law-abiding person who had a permit, that person could be arrested. Is that correct? As could who does have a permit. Either person could be arrested. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Shakin has recommended, just a moment, Mr. Shakin. Mr. Shakin has recommended that we delay the vote on this until our next meeting. Anybody who disagrees? Okay, Mr. Shakin.
I just wanted to provide an answer for legislative intent, I guess, if there is such a thing. Just from my perspective, to Ms. Berthelot's question, through you, Mayor, which is that the parking garage would be treated the same in this ordinance as any municipal parking lot, which is to say that the possession of a firearm lawfully stored within a vehicle would be permitted, but the possession of such a firearm outside of that vehicle would not be permitted. And so obviously you couldn't park a car in the library annex or the transportation center or the office that's part of that structure. So, but yes, if that this ordinance would mean that you would not be allowed to carry your firearm or dangerous weapon in the parking garage. So I think that's what this ordinance says. If there are issues with that, then that creates, we may need to address them at a future time. But for now, I think that is what it addresses. And then to the sort of question about something now being criminally liable, it's my expectation that if this passes, the town will start to conspicuously display signs just like they are displayed at the front of any building where firearms are prohibited, that would let anyone who is a lawful, law-abiding gun owner know that their possession outside of a vehicle is not allowed, and give them the appropriate warning so they don't find themselves accidentally in violation of the ordinance.
Ms. Van Zelm in the chat commented that there is an office for the parking administration people that is within the parking garage. But once again, I think Mr. Shakin's answer that you can't have a car in parking in the office of the park administrator would solve that problem. Because it is also town property. So even if it's within the parking garage, the weapon has to be locked in a car. So it would be okay. All right. Are we ready to move on to the next item on the agenda? Thank you, Mr. Shakin. Thank you very much, Mr. Deneen. And thank you all for your questions and your explanations. Now, COVID, Mr. Miller.
Greetings, Madam Mayor, and the rest of the council. Thank you for having me here again tonight. A number of items to review with you. I want to start off by just noting, I think you've seen some of the data out there, but statewide, there's been a strong downward trend of the prevalence of cases over the past 7 weeks or so. Despite the fact that the town of Mansfield is currently in the red alert town framework category, I can tell you that for the year-round residents, they too have been experiencing a similar downward trend for the year-round residents. And while I can't give you a precise number because of the challenges associated with Yukon population, I can tell you that I'm estimating that the year-round population is in the yellow category for a town response framework, despite the red category that currently exists on the state website. I did want to talk also and note, if you haven't noticed in the weekly report we put out, that there have been a number of fatalities in the town of Mansfield over the past number of weeks. You're currently at a count of 25. That is in direct, that's a direct connection to a very challenging winter that the Mansfield Center for Nursing Rehab has had over the past few months. You may recall, I noted some time ago, I think maybe in December, that they were experiencing an outbreak. Well, that outbreak unfortunately persisted through much of the winter. And I'm sad to report they had 14 fatalities over that period of time. I can tell you on a positive note that they have not had any positive residents or staff since February 9th, and that they are now soon to be opening up for visitation. It was a tough winter for them. I can tell you that the State Health Department Infection Control and Facility Licensing Inspection Group was working closely with infection control people on site, and that they were following the state's outbreak response plan to a T, as best as I can tell, with respect to long-term care facilities. But despite those efforts, unfortunately, it was a challenging winter. I want to go on and just talk briefly about vaccination coverage. The state of Connecticut current coverage for first doses statewide is 17.9%. Again, adjusting for Yukon population, I estimate that Mansfield's first dose coverage is at 23%. So it's above the statewide first dose coverage as of March 4th. I can also tell you, based on state numbers, that you're at 78% of coverage, first dose coverage for those 65 and 74, and 91% of those 75 and older. Again, the state number for 75 and older is 72.4%. And these are based on, this demographic categories are based on 2020 census. So in actuality, these numbers are probably a little lower. We continue to communicate with University of Connecticut. I've met with them a few times about the prospect of a community mass vaccination site with both Office of Emergency Management and Yukon Health. Those meetings are continuing. Kind of the couple of sticking points there are: one, what the actual allocation of vaccine would be to such a site, and two, resources and staffing available from Yukon Health. Like many vaccine providers in the state, there are pressures from a number of avenues seeking resources for vaccination. So Yukon Health is not immune to that, like many of the vaccine providers in the state are during this time of high demand of vaccine. So the Eastern Highlands Health District has been diligently conducting and hosting vaccination clinics. To date, we've administered 3,975 vaccinations, 2,770 is first dose, 1,205 is second dose. In the past week, we pivoted at the instruction of the state to teachers, education staff, and daycare providers. We have approximately 2,000 educators in our jurisdiction and about 600 to 800 daycare provider personnel. The health district did not have the bandwidth to directly provide vaccine directly to the daycare providers, and so we reached out to Yukon Health to assist and partner with us on that, and they agreed. and so they have agreed to take the lead, and they're reaching out directly to all our daycare providers and daycare sector personnel in the health district, and anticipate that they'll be able to meet that timeline of making vaccine available to all of them within the month of March. For our part, on the education side, last week we conducted 2 school clinics. We vaccinated the O. Smith staff on Wednesday and the Town of Mansfield Board of Education employees on Friday for a total of 442 teachers and staff. That also includes about 40 people from Andover Elementary School. We fit them into the O. Smith clinic. I know that I'm certainly aware that there's a keen interest among council members to get vaccine to those in our populations who are the most vulnerable, and that is certainly one part of that category is the homebound. I can assure you that the health district shares an interest in deploying resources to get to those hard to reach populations. Towards that end, I don't mind telling you that the town manager's office has been very diligent in their efforts to seek workarounds on ways that we can work together and partner to reach those hard to get individuals. We've met and discussed on a number of occasions some of those workarounds, exploring possible ways that might be able to work. In the end, I can tell you that that the health district's objective is to begin vaccinating the homebound at the end of this month or the beginning of next. Staff has on the health district side started to look earnestly at planning for that eventuality, pending how the campaign with the teachers and the daycare providers goes. I'm cautiously optimistic that we can start to do homebound by the end of this month. We'll be working with not only the town of Mansfield as a partner, but many of our municipalities in the health district to come up with ways to make it as efficient as possible. I know that there's been discussions about using EMS for vaccinators, and certainly at the very least, we'll be leveraging that asset to help us with the observation period when it comes to administering vaccine to the homebound. I can also tell you the state of Connecticut is ramping up a statewide referral network, which the health district will be participating in. 211 is going to be a big part of that. There's going to be an intake form that's accessible to the general public, both via by telephone or online, in which it will screen applicants to determine whether or not they're actually homebound, and then those referrals will be made appropriately to whatever local vaccination provider is providing that service in that particular municipality. So that's the update I have, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Any members of the council have any questions? Mr. Shakin.
Thank you, Mayor. At the last council meeting, just to put hopefully a pin on the homebound, first of all, I'm very happy to hear that we've got a plan in the works to make this happen. My understanding from your last report, Mr. Miller, is that there's some regulatory hurdles to overcome in terms of our nurse to supervise the vaccine or to give it themselves, and that your staff is understandably not available to go on the road. My understanding, though, from Ryan's report 2 weeks ago is that the senior services, the human services folks think there are as few as 3 people that they know of, at least, who are homebound who need access to the vaccine. And so what I am wondering from both you and from Ryan is if, and I know because I've heard from a relative of one of those people that that they've been in regular contact with the senior center. And so what I'm wondering is if it's possible to before the beginning of next month, try to make sure that that person has access to a vaccine one way or another.
Sure. I can touch base with Jamel at Senior Center and get the name of that person, and we'll see what we can do. I guess the question: do we think that this person is homebound, or we're not sure?
They are. They may be the one person that the Senior Center is sure is homebound, which I think Ryan reported 2 weeks ago that there was exactly one person in town in the Senior Center considered homebound who had not gotten vaccine access from a healthcare provider or somewhere else.
Well, I can touch base with the Senior Center, and we can certainly take a look at that.
And then my second question, while I've got the floor, is, as we discussed earlier with regard to this weekend's events, the students are scheduled to move home on April 11th, which is about a month from now. And last time we were in this situation in the fall, we had started to have some conversation at the end of the fall semester about trying to work with the university to keep their, what that was at the time, testing capability functioning for community use during the 2 months or so in between when students left and when they came back, and that was ultimately unsuccessful. Have you been having conversations as we see Hartford Healthcare and some other vaccine providers open mass vaccination sites? I think Foxwoods is the closest one to us now, that was just announced today, that the university's capacity in their Shaw and the student health services folks, with all of the medical providers that are employed in those in that department, might be able to start doing mass vaccinations for the general public on campus sometime shortly following students' departure in April.
So I have had that conversation with Shaw in particular, and my understanding is that there is some kind of direct conflict with their charge as it pertains to protection of students. There's some kind of limit to the medical services they can provide outside of the student body, which is why UConn Health is the ones that are doing the vaccination and the testing of the staff on campus, at least in part, is my understanding. And it would be UConn Health that, if this mass vaccination were to stand up and provide the community, that would be staffing this site at this point in time.
And just so I'm clear, and I'm happy to, I would like to follow up offline to find out what exactly those regulatory barriers are, and because we have a month to try to work them out, and and I hope we can. Just to be clear though, when you say UConn Health is the entity providing the services to non-students, does that include with healthcare personnel that would otherwise be employed at student health services, or are we talking personnel that are UConn Health employees who are generally providing health services to the general public in their day-to-day jobs?
So UConn Health is, as you know, the entity out of Farmington Health Center, their healthcare network, just essentially like any other kind of health, like Hartford Healthcare or Trinity. At least they operate like one in many regards. And it is UConn Health that is providing the vaccinations to eligible UConn staff and COVID testing to staff who needs it, in partnership with the Human Resources Department. Human Resources Department of the University of Connecticut. Student Health and Wellness, which is a completely separate cohort of medical providers. Their charge is solely to protect the health and welfare and wellness of the student body. They don't provide any medical services, as I understand it, to anybody other than student body. My understanding is there's some kind of limit, some kind of restriction to that effect. What the basis of that is, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, thanks.
I would fact that they are funded out of fees paid by students. You know, the students pay tuition and they pay fees, and those fees support residence life and the whole range of other services. And my guess is they also pay for student health and wellness, and that may be the reason for the limit. I'm not positive, but based on my history in higher education, which goes back many years, that would be my guess. I have a question about testing, however. We've been focusing so much on vaccination. Are people still getting tested? Is their testing rate dropping? What's going on with testing?
Yeah, absolutely. The demand for tests is definitely falling off in a material way. I think this past Wednesday, there's between 90 and 100 specimens collected. And by comparison, just before the holidays, when you were looking at over 300. So there's been a clear drop off in demand, not just in Mansfield site, but statewide. I think it's hard to speculate as to exactly why. I'm sure there are a number of factors involved. But the state, I know, is rethinking the contracts with the laboratories they have for testing, and so I'm unsure as to what the future holds for our own site here in Mansfield and for the other sites in the health district in Tolland.
Does it concern you that people are getting fewer tests?
Yeah, absolutely. We need to, I think, messaging continues to be out of the state. If you're concerned, you think you've been exposed, there's certain very specific criteria in which testing is recommended. And I can tell you within our observations with contact tracing staffs, for the most part, when people are identified as a contact, they do go get tested. But I think the fact that the prevalence of cases have dropped off, there are certainly fewer close contacts to recommend testing for, certainly part of it. I think I'd be more concerned about the reduction in testing if our positivity rate was higher, but our positivity rate continues to be low, which I think as long as it remains low, then a reduction in testing is manageable. But once it starts ticking up again, that's when we're really going to need to make sure we get more people tested.
Does anybody else have questions for Mr. Miller? Ms. Berthelot?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to say thank you, Mr. Miller, for the report and for your continuing super hard work. We really do appreciate it, and for working with the town to reach our hard to reach older populations. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions? All right, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda. Thank you once again, Mr. Miller.
You're welcome.
The next item is the Economic Development Commission report. Mr. Farino.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
As you know, and Ms. Van Zelm, who would like to begin this? Mr. Farino, Ms. Van Zelm?
I think I'm going to start, and Cynthia's going to run.
I need to make Cynthia presenter. I'm working on that now. If I can, there she is.
I think you have some bells and whistles.
All right. So I believe that you guys all have a copy of this in your packet. So in the interest of not taking up too much time tonight, I'll kind of skim through most of it. There's a significant amount of effort went into the comments below the slides. So please do make sure you get a chance to read through those. But we'll run through this deck real quick. And then if you have any questions, happy to answer. All right, Cynthia, if you want to start, that'd be great. So I am Steve Farina. I'm the chair of the Economic Development Commission here for Mansfield. Here's our other members. We have a couple of slots currently open, which we're looking to fill. Next slide.
I believe these spots are filled by the town manager rather than the town council. Is that correct?
Yeah, we generally try to find somebody that we think will be suitable, and they'll make a recommendation, and it's ultimately the town manager's decision. Just a quick refresher on what we're here to do. This slide, I don't believe has changed. I think this is the third or fourth, maybe the fifth time I've been here for one of these things, so we'll skip through this one right on to the next slide. And just our mission here to support existing businesses, to focus on targeted areas for development, and to recruit new businesses that would be a good fit for our town. Next slide. This one we keep in here every year just because it illustrates the importance of what we're trying to do. Those pie charts at the top just show that the value of the tax-exempt properties continues to grow. In fact, it's more valuable than the non-tax exempt properties here in our town. And if you look at the bar graph at the bottom right, the amount of pilot funding that we receive as a percentage every year continues to go down and down and down. So an ever-growing need to diversify our tax base. Next slide. Next.
Not sure why it's not moving.
Let me see. Well,
have you tried page down
and
I was just going to ask if you're trying page down and the arrow keys, or
I was doing the arrow and it was fine, so I'm not sure what's going on here.
While you're working that out, can I ask a question? Or
sure.
The value of the tax-exempt properties, is that determined by what would be their alternate? Were they being used for alternate purposes? That is the value. How is that determined?
The value, yeah. So whatever they would be assessed at, I guess. So if they put a new dorm up on campus and it was a, $20 million project or a $10 million project or whatever it is, that would be the value, and then that would be tax exempt.
Okay.
Just in case you guys didn't notice, the legislature did pass the revision to the pilot program that would give Mansfield in tier 1 of the towns for pilot reimbursement, and it would guarantee we would get a much higher percentage of the value as reimbursed, but they didn't fund it yet, so we don't know exactly what's going to happen. If they funded it fully, we'd get an extra $2.7 million or something. Quite a bit of money.
Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the tier 1 level, isn't that 50%?
Right. So if we're
currently like 42%. So for us,
yeah. So
be about an 8% increase, get us from 42 to 50% if it was fully funded.
In the interest of keeping this rolling, and if maybe we'll get it figured out in the meantime, but if you guys have the presentation slides in front of you, I'm happy to continue just off the hard copy if you have them.
Sounds good, Steve.
Okay. So if you click, I'm sorry?
It starts on page 37 of our packet.
Great. And so the following slide, the top would say pilot grant 2010 to present, and it shows a red mountain chart. And this is just another depiction of how the shortfall that we've received from the state via pilot funds has grown every year, or almost every year, and continues to widen. And just another visual example of why we need to diversify our tax base so we're less reliant on these pilot funds. The following slide, the growth of the commercial and tax industrial base, shows that we have been able to grow the commercial portion of the grand list. So back in 2010, it was at 13.3%. And as of 2019, it had grown to 22.1. That hasn't changed too much in our presentation. And I think the key thing to keep in mind with that is the following slide, which is continued dedication to the open space preservation. So we've been able to grow the grand list, but not at the extent of what makes Mansfield, Mansfield, which is all of our great land, all of our great outdoor areas for recreation and for farmland and just for what makes the nature of our town. So the following slide should be easy to see because it's bright pink. It says Mask Up Mansfield. Hopefully you've seen these around town. This would fall under supporting existing businesses, and Cynthia and her staff did an amazing job this past year dealing with the pandemic, helping to keep existing business owners up to date on changing regulations and funding opportunities. The Mask Up Mansfield campaign was a huge help to those business owners out there and helping to come up with signs and best practices. And then as far as helping the restaurants, the outdoor dining permits, and Linda Painter was absolutely critically helpful with this one, with getting no fee, quick application turnaround time, and getting these outdoor seating areas available so that we could help our affected food places continue to operate. So scroll down a little bit because there's a lot of text on that one. The next slide on my deck is the opportunity zone one. So under the area or under the heading of targeted development, we continue to focus on the opportunity zone. We were able to include the town of Mansfield in our opportunity zone in the Site Selector magazine last summer, so that people looking for opportunity zones knew that we had a very attractive one here in our town. We completed a market feasibility study with Advanced CT, which was formerly CERC. And I believe they did a presentation to town council a while back on all of this. We continue to try to market our opportunity zone. We continue to update the website. We continue to try to meet with prospective developers and businesses that would be good fits for our area. The next slide, again, another opportunity zone. This shows the four corners. Front and center would be Toast Four Corners and Hops 44. To your left is CVS. Just a nice aerial shot of one of the areas in our opportunity zone. One of our objectives for this year is to complete a parcel book that shows not just the opportunity zone, but also other pieces of land that are maybe outside of the opportunity zone, maybe on the south side of town or Perkins Corner. That would be good spots for targeted development. We are also requesting that we continue to fund the economic service agreement with the Mansfield Downtown Partnership, so we can continue with Cynthia, who gives us such tremendous aid in all of this, and all of her staff has been absolutely critical for us furthering all of these goals. Next slide, you'll see a picture of our Mansfield Your Place to Grow visitor guide. It's more of a marketing piece to try to attract people to town. If you haven't seen it, it's absolutely beautiful. It really hits a lot of the things that make Mansfield, Mansfield. And I'm sure you're all aware that we now have a communication specialist here for Mansfield, which has been great for getting a lot of this stuff out and to people so they know about our town. And if Cynthia's here, I'm going to let her talk a little bit about the signage, which is the bottom of this slide and the next slide, which we're just getting ready to hopefully put into action.
Good
Cynthia,
evening.
take it over?
I'm here. I think, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I apologize for that. I have my cursor over on the GoToMeeting photos. So that's, I apologize again. That's what got a little messed up. So as Steve said, we're really trying to continue our whole marketing plan under the capital budget to promote Mansfield. and 2 other projects to do that, which we had discussed, I believe, at the last update from the EDC, at least in the copy that you got. I think in the fall, John Carrington had sent to you a slide presentation. And so that is gateway signage. So we are looking at signage at Stores Road and Route 32, and then in the southern part of Mansfield at Stores Road and North Frontage Road. So this is really another piece to show people where our boundaries are, to show that you're entering into Mansfield and all the great things that we have to offer. So as a companion piece to that, we are working on comprehensive signage, both directional and wayfinding signage for the town of Mansfield. So we would have consistency to our signage. We have a lot of mishmash of signs over the years, and this would be an ongoing project in terms of funding the actual signage. But what we'd like to do is to work with a team to put together a signage program and package that would also, along with being a companion to our gateway signage, would be a companion to our communications toolkit. So the font size, the logo, the branding. So we're really excited about that. We have a great marketing team, and as Steve mentioned, bringing Margaret Chady onto the team as communication specialist has really been a wonderful addition. I'll turn it back over to Steve.
Sure, and then on the next page, you'll just see a little bit more of that wayfinding signage that Cynthia was talking about. On the following page, it talks a little bit about the different subcommittees that the EDC has. Due to COVID this past year, we weren't able to meet quite as regularly as we would have liked, but this just kind of talks about the different areas we've identified to continue our work in. And obviously, moving forward to this year, I'll be able to get back to furthering these goals as well. We'd like to continue with funding the Taste of Mansfield and our other EDC activities. I think we talked about that briefly already. And then the final slide would just be our recommendations to Town Council. Obviously, continue to work with UConn on economic development where we can find mutually beneficial projects. And I truly believe that we can find some common ground to work with them on, and hopefully continuing to support local business procurement policies, helping to support the work of the Ad Hoc Committee on Affordable and Workforce Housing, helping to support implementation for the Economic Vitality Action Plan, and to help support the marketing activities to promote Mansfield to new residents and new businesses. So that's the quick version of everything. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, I'll turn the floor back over to you and let you get on with your meeting.
Does anybody have any questions for Steve? Mr. Freudman, followed by Mr. Katzenberger.
Well, I don't really have any questions per se. I was going to make some comments, but to frame it as a question, I know there's a big point. You point out in the report how much the grand list has gone up for commercial grand list. And I would posit to you that an increase in the grand list, the commercial grand list, does not necessarily mean that it has been remunerative for the town. It all depends. If a developer comes in and is building commercial property and it's completely on his dime, say like the Eastbrook Mall many years ago, or for that matter, Cumberland Farms much more recently on a smaller scale, that's wonderful. That's great model for investment. However, a big part of the increase in commercial grand list is probably in the last decade is due to the Store Center project, where the town put in many millions of dollars of its money. It's a subsidized project. It's what I would call corporate welfare. Yes, it's increased the grand list, but I have lots of data to show that it's never really become remunerative for the town. I mean, I estimated that we spent $5 to $6 million up front, just to get us through the 2011 period when we signed the development agreement. Just $750,000 just in legal fees, and that's never been amortized. I won't belabor the point. I've spoken on this issue many times, but I know that. Yes, Mayor, I will spare you. But really, it's a message that shouldn't just be derided and mocked away like that you don't want to hear it. Having a grand list go up doesn't mean it's good for the town. I would make the analogy, if somebody takes a minimum wage job for 20 hours a week, 5 hours a day, 4 days commuting back and forth to New Britain, and then somebody points to their tax return and say, look, you had much more wages than you had the prior year when you weren't working at all. That doesn't mean it's been profitable for the person, because it doesn't show all the gasoline and wear and tear on the car. That may not be the best example, but I think it illustrates my point. And I think the EDC should be giving sage, sober advice. And I made this comment some 3 years ago after one of John McGuire's presentations. He was your predecessor, Mr. Ferrigno, as chair. And I made the comment, I don't think I made it in his presence, that just looking at an increase in the grand list and saying that shows ipso facto that it's remunerative to the town is the most, excuse me, but superficial method of valuation. So I'll leave that point there. It's just a comment. So I guess if I was going to ask a question, and you don't really have to answer, it's more a rhetorical question, but I'd like to know, do you look at these broader issues? Is this real investment, or is it corporate welfare? And if it's corporate welfare, which is what we do in Mansfield, that's not good for the public fisc, even though it increases the grand list.
Does anybody else wish to ask Mr. Farino or to comment on Mr. Farino's presentation? Mr. Katzenberger.
Thank you. I won't go into, I do disagree with David's comments, but I think we both thank the commission for their work over many years, particularly with Steve. My question is, so in terms of collaboration with UConn, I know there's been discussion over the years that the number of UConn faculty and staff who reside, particularly newer faculty and staff who reside in Mansfield, is really declined over the years. And ultimately, of course, that's a matter of personal choice and market forces that but we also, there were discussions about at least having UConn present Mansfield, or allow us to present them in a, if not formal, informal manner to new faculty and staff that might be considering moving somewhere. And I think that has a lot of merit. I'm just wondering if that is going on, where we stand with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Part of that Mansfield guide that we produced, they've been distributed to UConn as well as the local realtors. So hopefully we can kind of put our best foot forward as this is a great place to live. It's an issue that we've seen, that I've heard so many times, not only as part of the EDC, but as part of the Mansfield Preservation Neighborhoods Group. We have a missing part of our market where incoming faculty and staff can't find nice, affordable rental property. And so a lot of times they're not able to come and buy right away for whatever reason. Maybe they don't have, well, for whatever reason. And so they say, you know what, I want to rent first. And they can't find anything here in Mansfield. And so they go rent somewhere else, maybe Vernon, South Windsor, Manchester, wherever. And that's sort of where they set up their tent. They establish ties to that community. If they have kids, their kids start in those schools. If they find restaurants in those areas, they find a gym there. And then when they are in a position to buy a house, they look in areas that they're familiar with and they know. So I think we're missing a lot of that because we're not capturing them right away. And so I think there's absolutely a way we could work with UConn to try to address that need. And I think that'd be beneficial for both UConn and for our town.
Great. Thank you, Steve.
And I was just going to add, I know it's been discussed in the past, but I know, having attended multiple meetings that President Katsoulakis has spoken at, this is a theme that he has come back to multiple times, his desire to see university faculty and staff live in town and be part of the Mansfield community. So it helps that, to hear that from a leadership level, that's a priority of his administration as well.
Any further questions? Well, thank you very much, Mr. Farino. Thank you for the work of the commission. I know sometimes this feels thankless, but this is really important to the town's development on all kinds of levels. So thank you, and would you thank the members of your commission for their volunteering to do this work?
And most especially Cynthia and her staff. She's absolutely just puts in yeoman's work on our behalf. So Cynthia, thank you for everything. And thank you all very much, and wish you a very speedy rest of your meeting.
Thanks, Steve.
Mr. Farino. All right. The next item on our agenda is an agreement between the town of Mansfield and the Regional School District 19 for parking lot services. Mr. Aylesworth?
I'm going to turn things over to Mr. Carrington, and I'll speak about this when he's done as appropriate.
Welcome back, John. I'm sorry we kept you till 9 away.
I expected it. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
This is my third time coming before the council for this agreement with Region 19. I came in 2015, 2018, and now we're back for 2021. It's an agreement to take care of their parking lot. Mainly, most of the cost is for snow removal. And then there's also some work to line stripe their parking lot once every 3 years and do some catch basin cleaning, sweeping of the parking lot, and repairing any curb damage. You can see from the attached spreadsheet, the proposed fee is $42,751 per year over a 3-year period, and then that can go up based on consumer price index. And that's what Region 19 would pay the town. So this is a revenue, getting $42,000 a year covers all our costs, as I show on the attached spreadsheets. And they do cover employee benefits and other post-employment benefits. And, they've looked at this time they didn't look, but last time they looked going out just for snow plowing, and it was significantly higher than what we were charging them. And they'd have to pay that fee at a retainer. They'd have to pay it whether it was a mild year or not. So it's a good deal for both parties. We get some money and they get some savings, which ultimately 59% of the school is paid for by Mansfield taxpayers. So it's a savings to the Mansfield taxpayer. And that's all I have. Is there any questions?
Mr. Aylesworth, are we up to questions?
Yep, John hit the highlights. My understanding is that it was, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but was it closer to $60,000 just for the snow removal piece previously?
I believe 3 years ago it was 45,000, but probably with inflation now and
That's okay. You're speculating with the inflation what it might be. Yeah. Other than to reiterate what John was saying about, as a percentage, if the town was, whatever the number was, if it's north of, what the school district is paying the town for the service, if we're paying 59% of that, and obviously not getting any amount reimbursed, it would certainly appear to be financially disadvantageous to do it that way compared to the current approach, which we're able to do for lower costs to the district, but also at the same time have our costs offset. So it seems like a straightforward and sensible thing to do for both parties involved.
Okay, if people have questions of our staff, I will entertain those questions now. Mr. Freudman, you had your hand up if you have a question for the staff.
Well, I think I could save them for more comments if there's a motion put on, but I would just ask a general question if either Mr. Aylesworth or Mr. Carrington would care to address it. How would you address the concern that in this agreement, you have to fix curbs, and that's kind of open-ended. You may have, 5 feet of curb that got damaged, or somebody took quite a swipe at it and you have 150 yards of curb, or I saw there's a little clause in there about fixing potholes. No limit. It could be 2 potholes or it could be 62 potholes. It seems kind of open-ended. Would you care to address that?
I don't think it's that open-ended. The curb, most of it is concrete, so it doesn't get damaged. We haven't fixed much curbing in my 7 years here. Potholes, we've fixed very little. It's, like I said, it's a good deal all around. I mean, I guess something catastrophic could happen, and then we would probably talk to the region. I think they'd be very understanding.
Mr. Shaken.
Thanks. The sort of question along that line, the memo says that the town's able to provide the service at no net expense, meaning that the $43,000, $42,750 that the contract is for covers all costs incurred. So I just have a question about both capital and then staff. Just so I'm clear, we're not purchasing any additional equipment to plow the parking lot. Is that correct?
You are correct.
And we don't have an additional Department of Public Works staff person that's necessitated by this agreement. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so it's really just the time that that person or that crew spends on the parking lot when there's snow events, and then any depreciation of the town's equipment that's caused by that particular spaces plowing that this contract is paying for, and any raw materials involved in the other maintenance, paint, asphalt for parking, for potholes and that kind of thing, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. If there aren't questions, I'm happy to make the motion, but I'll defer if there's other questions.
There is a recommendation to approve the proposed agreement, which occurs on page 57. Does anybody else have any questions of the staff regarding this proposal? Thank you.
Thanks. I then would like to move to approve the proposed agreement with Region 19 to provide parking lot services, primarily snow removal.
Ms. Berthelot, you second? Ms. Berthelot, second. Mr. Shaken, speak to your motion.
Sure. Very briefly, this is a good idea. This is one of those things that we ought to share services, especially given the fact that public works crews are currently plowing municipal property on almost all sides of E.O. Smith High School, including at part of the town hall parking lot that's only accessible by a driveway that belongs to E.O. Smith. And it makes sense. It saves Mansfield taxpayers money by saving the region money. And I couldn't imagine a scenario where the region had a private contractor plowing the parking lot when Mansfield Department of Public Works plows were directly next door at the town hall and the community center, and directly across the street working on the sidewalks at the Mansfield downtown and the roads at the Mansfield downtown. So I think it makes sense, and we ought to approve it again. So I appreciate your time. Hope you vote for it. Thank you.
Mr. Friedman.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. And I really appreciate all my council colleagues, this time, he's having questions. Were there any questions, not jumping and putting a motion on it? I really do appreciate that. I oppose this agreement, and I think everybody is entitled to, I feel I should give you my reasons. I don't think the money is worth it. We're not taking fully into account all the costs of overtime, wear and tear on our equipment. When I see a truck having to be replaced after 15, 16 years, I wonder if maybe we would have gotten an extra year of it. We're not accounting for the insurance and the 1/16th of the cost of a new truck. I think is rather a problem here. We have to clean the catch basins. There's the issue of repairing curbs I have curbs in my neighborhood that sometimes get taken out, and they're not, and many of them are concrete, and they get chewed up if there's somebody gets too close to them with a big plow, and they have gotten damaged. So they're not they're resilient, but not that resilient. I mentioned that we have to fix curbs, and I mentioned that we have to fix potholes. That's totally open-ended. I don't think this is a good deal for the town. And I did something today. I checked with Hebron, and they don't, and they are next door to a regional high school that serves 3 towns, Ram Regional School, which serves Hebron, Andover, and Marlboro, and they're just next door also to their own school that's in their town, and they have nothing to do with their parking lot. I checked again with them, and I did the same at Parish Hill High School, and they're right there in Hampton. It's a regional school for 3 towns, and Hampton has nothing to do with their parking lot. I was told them quite emphatically that the high school, the regional high school, takes care of its own. So I would wonder, what is it that Hebron and Hampton and many other towns in Connecticut that are host to regional schools, what is it that they know that we don't, that we think we're so smart taking on this liability? I don't think this is good for the town. And in general, I don't think we should be farming out our services that way. That's not what people invest their tax money in town equipment and in all the employees and future pension liabilities. So I will vote against this. That's my comment. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Mr. Bruder, followed by Mr. Aylesworth.
I just wanted to point out as a proud Ram alum that the parking lot situation at Ram High School also includes the Ram Middle School, which is much larger, much more separate and distinct. So the fact that the E.O. Smith and the town hall and everything, the way it's set up and the way that this agreement has been working, I'm in favor of it, and I hope that my other counselors will support it.
Any further comments or questions? Mr. Aylesworth.
I was just going to give John an opportunity to speak to the equipment rates that are included, because I believe that some of the items that Mr. Freudman alluded to in terms of his concern about, full cost of depreciation, insurances, and these sorts of things being captured, I believe that is factored into this rate, but maybe Mr. Carrington could speak to that.
Yes, we're for all the equipment, we're using the FEMA rates, so it's much higher than our actual costs. If you just said a truck costs this much, it includes everything. It's a high rate. Overtime is included. Everything is included. Been doing it for 7 years now. There hasn't been any issue. It's a great thing. I can't speak for the other towns. They probably don't have a good public works department that wants to get out and plow for the region and help them out and save taxpayers money. But here in Mansfield, I didn't create this. This has been around. Lon did this, and it's a good thing for the taxpayers. And I can't see why anybody would be against this. This should have been a consent agenda item.
Thank you. I would comment that if there were 2 contracts that came before the council and we had to choose between them, a $42,000 contract that used town facilities and a $60,000 contract that contracted out, we would not have much difficulty making a choice to save the taxpayers money. We would go for the cheaper one. In any case, are we ready to vote? Ms. Chain, would you call the roll on this?
Yes. Osberger.
Yes. No.
Berthelot.
No.
Oh, I got it. Thank you, Mr. Osberger. Berthelot.
Yes.
Bruder.
Yes.
Freudman.
No.
Kotchenberger.
Yes.
Moran.
Yes.
Shuren.
Yes.
Shaken.
Yes.
Thank you.
The motion to adopt this agreement passes. The next item on our agenda is the Martin Luther King mural project. Mr. Aylesworth. Thank you, Mr. Carrington.
Thanks, John. In early February, Superintendent Kelly Lyman brought to my attention and Cynthia Van Zome's attention of an opportunity to engage in a community art project. It's a project called CT Murals is partnering with 39 communities across Connecticut to create 39 murals for each of Martin Luther King Jr.'s years of life. They want to do it by Martin Luther King Day 2022. Each mural will represent the messages, images, and symbols that Dr. King stood for. Connecticut Murals will work with national level artists in collaboration with local artists to create high quality murals. Connecticut Murals is a project started by a nonprofit known as the Rise Up Group. The project was started in 2015 to create public art that is inclusive and accessible for anyone. Connecticut Murals began executing murals as a youth community service project, and its artists have completed over $90% of the public-facing murals in Hartford, with projects expanding across the state in 2021. We've been discussing a number of possible mural locations within the town of Mansfield. The majority of these are in the downtown Stories area, but there is one being considered at the southern end of town near the mall. And we view this as an opportunity for a collaboration, not just with the town and the downtown partnership, but also our public schools and UConn. We have a number of organizations and committees within those entities that are deeply committed to human rights. Obviously, the town itself has a human rights commission. It also has an arts advisory board. And so the hope is to get as many different related interests kind of together to help guide this effort. And so in addition to your broad support for the concept of a mural in Mansfield that again displays the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we're looking to have the council support or authorize me as town manager to pursue grant dollars and ultimately accept any grant dollars were awarded in furtherance of this project. This particular program is set up as a one-to-one match with a maximum of $7,500 being contributed towards the project. So basically a project budget of up to $15,000 would be matched, or half that project budget would be covered by this grant program. If we went beyond that, additional dollars would have to be brought in. And I think, yes, I see that Superintendent Kelly Lyman is on the meeting now. And I think that she had some things she wanted to say on this topic as well. So I'll give her the floor if she's there. Yep.
Welcome, Ms. Lyman.
Good evening. Thank you, everybody. I think you did a great job, Ryan. So I don't have too much more I would have added. I will just mention that this project was presented to a group of superintendents who were pretty excited about the opportunities to work collaboratively in their communities on this kind of project. The quality of the art is exceptional, and even more importantly, I think, are the efforts to really make this a community event. So this is not just about hiring an artist to come in and paint something on a public wall. It's really about engaging the community. So there are opportunities, and we've talked with Rise Up about this. There are opportunities for us to engage students in the design work, to have community members involved on the day or days that the mural is actually put up, and to really make a community celebration out of it. They've done this already in several communities, and they have several more that are interested in becoming one of their 39 communities. The one thing I will mention with regards to funding is the expectation is that we find our own funding source for the $7,500 that is the match. So the expectation is not that it comes out of anybody's budget necessarily, but that we make a commitment to raise that money. And so that's something that I'd be certainly happy to get the schools involved with, and the students as well, if this project were to move forward.
Mr. Gruder.
Thank you. I just had a question for anybody that wanted to answer it. The $7,500 isn't just financial; it's also in-kind labor.
Correct.
Great. Yeah, I'm in favor. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff regarding this proposal? There is a motion on page 64. Mr. Bruder.
I'd like to make the motion if there's no other question.
Go ahead.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
Move effective March 8th, 2021 to authorize the town manager to submit grant applications for funds to be used for a Martin Luther King mural in our community, and if said grant applications are approved, to accept said grants on behalf of the town and to act as the authorized representative of the town and execute any agreements or contracts relative to said project.
Is there a second? Ms. Berthelot, second. Mr. Bruder, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I think that this could be a really inspiring community project for us to do if we can get the grant money. I'm sure that there are a number of local artists that I think would provide in-kind contributions. You know, I don't know any offhand or anything like that, but I know that I would be willing to make a donation through the school if it was a fundraiser or something like that. So I'm sure Superintendent Lyman probably has a good idea of where to begin as well as our town manager. So I hope everyone can support this.
Mr. Asperger? Go ahead. Mr. Asperger, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say I just wanted to say briefly that I think this is a wonderful project, and you know, how fast can we get it going? And it's basically all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Any other comments? Are we ready to vote? Is there anybody who wishes to abstain? Is there anybody who wishes to vote in the negative? Then I will rule that this motion has been adopted unanimously. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Kelly.
you.
The next, thanks, Kelly. The next item on our agenda is the item that was moved from the consent agenda. That is the approval of the license agreement between the town of Mansfield and the Mansfield Downtown Partnership for Office Space. And that begins on page 11. Mr. Aylesworth?
Sure. As I understand it, the downtown partnership has occupied the office space at the Nash Zimmer Transportation Center for about 7 years, and when they moved in there, I think expectation or hope on both sides was that it would continue to occupy it for the foreseeable future and continue to provide a service to the town from that downtown hub in stores, in downtown stores. The draft agreement you have in your packet is relatively boilerplate in the sense of, you know, being a continuation of past agreements. The annual rate of increase, which is 2%, was done with some research into the consumer price index relative to housing and leases. There, as you can appreciate, there's necessarily a CPI specific to the lease of commercial office space, but we were able to kind of triangulate in on a number that seemed fair and equitable, and that was 2%. So I'll let Cynthia speak to this as well. But it certainly seems that this is in continuing the longstanding relationship between the town and the downtown partnership, and continuing to provide, you know, suitable office space for which they can pursue their mission. So, Cynthia.
Thanks, Ryan. I really don't have too much else to add. I did have a typo in the motion. I apologize. So it should reflect what's in the recommendation, which should be a 2-year rent for $28,016. But again, as Ryan said, this is a continuation of an agreement that's been in place for several years.
So the actual motion should say 28,016.
Correct, 16116.
Okay. Any questions of staff? I will point out that this location is extremely important for the downtown partnership, which has a very major function of serving as an ombudsperson between the downtown businesses and the business owners and also the town. So it's been a really important place. Also, there's been a library space in the room below, and I'm really hoping that once the pandemic is over, the library will return there. It offers a real service to the residents of those buildings and also to our local community, who find it really easy to drop off and pick up books and other supplies there. The rent is, however, only for the space that the partnership itself occupies. Ms. Berthelot.
Unless people have further questions, I'd like to make the motion.
Please do.
Move to approve the town manager to execute the proposed license agreement with Mansfield Downtown Partnership for the use of 820 square feet of office space in the Nash Simmer Transportation Center with a rent payment of $28,016 for the 24-month term commencing on July 1st, 2021 and expiring on June 30th, 2023.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Kotchenberger. Further comment? You want to speak to your motion?
Clearly, the work that's being done by the Mansfield Downtown Partnership is super important for the future of our town. And this has been a great agreement so far. And as the mayor just pointed out, it's a really ideal location for the work that's been done. We've certainly seen firsthand how important it was during the COVID epidemic that our businesses felt supported, that there was leadership and lots of great ideas coming through the Mansfield Downtown Partnership. So I hope you support the motion.
Thank you. Mr. Freudman.
Yes, thank you. And again, I thank all my colleagues, and in this case, Councilor Berthelot in particular, for seeing if there were questions before diving into a motion. I really do appreciate it. Back on June 8th, we had 3 agreements that were passed over the minority party opposition, which had to do with, extending agreements with the Mansfield Downtown Partnership. And my argument then, and my argument today, is not that the Downtown Partnership doesn't do a good job, and it certainly has very competent leadership in Ms. Van Zelm, but is on Ms. Leopold. My point then, and my point today is this: the Downtown Partnership was created, I believe it was in 2001. The idea was to promote the Store Center project. 10 years later, that's how long these things take. 10 years later, the development agreement was signed. And within 2 years, 3 at the most, maybe when the last building went in, the grocery store or whatever it was, the project was built out. It was completed. And I said then, and I'm saying again today, congratulations. It did what it was created to do. And I think at some point in government, there needs to be some kind of, sunset clause or otherwise, some idea that at some point you've done your mission. And it's time to end that particular function that is no longer relevant. The project is built out. So for that reason, I will vote no on this motion.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to comment? Ms. Chain, are we ready to vote? Ms. Chain, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Osberger,
No.
Berthelot,
Yes.
Bruder,
Yes.
Freudman,
No.
Katchenberger,
Yes.
Moran.
Yes.
Shuren,
Yes.
Shaken.
Yes.
Thank you.
The motion passes. And I would like to thank Ms. Sanzelm very much for her work on this effort and her contributions to the town, both through the Downtown Partnership and through our Economic Development Program. All right. The next item on the agenda, a report of council committees. Does Finance Committee have anything to report?
Sorry, I just had to turn it off. Mayor, yeah, we met today, tonight before this meeting, and our focus was discussing with Kermer on the generalities of the property casualty policy we've had with Kermer for many years, which includes auto liability, property. We did not talk about workers' compensation, but that's part of it too. There was no need for any decision. This was an introduction, more or less. We should very shortly receive the proposed rates for upcoming year, but overall, in property casualty, in liability, the rates have been up somewhat. Other areas, workers' comp down. So, and then we also discussed briefly, setting an agenda topic, depending on what the town council as a whole wants, to discuss the specifics of the MCC and the Silver Sneakers programs and various financial alternatives and scenarios. Thank you.
And that's for agenda.
Pardon?
And that's for a future agenda.
Yes.
That's something you discussed tonight. Okay. Personnel?
We've not met.
Committee on committees?
We have a sparse agenda planned for Thursday. I don't believe there's any interviews, but I do think there's some reappointments that we'll be discussing. We did not have an agenda, or I'm sorry, we did not have a meeting in February. And if I could just also mention that our ad hoc committee on affordable housing will be meeting on Wednesday to discuss the survey and possibly some other things, but that'll be our main focus.
Thank you. Does anybody have any comments on departmental and advisory committee reports? Any comments on petitions, requests, and communications? Any items for future agendas? Mr. Katchenberger.
I just wanted to follow up. We talked a couple meetings ago, and Ron has brought it up to some kind of primer on Robert's Rules of Order, and I wanted to see what the council as a whole thought about this.
I think that Mr. Aylesworth is going to set up a special session for council members and any other committee members who wish to have training. I think he will notify us when such an arrangement has been made. Mr. Aylesworth?
Thank you for the reminder, Mr. Katchenberger.
Oh, no, thanks. I appreciate the update. Thank you.
Okay. Any other future agenda items? We are heading into budget season pretty soon, so clear your calendars because that's what we're going to be doing for starting the end of this month. Okay. Nothing else on future agenda. There's only one motion left on the agenda for tonight. Is somebody got, Ms. Berthelot?
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second? Mr. Bruder seconds. Does anybody object to adjourning? Mr. Osberger, are you objecting to adjourning? Doubt it. Okay, good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night, all.
No.
Everybody.
Bye.